So, as you can see, we've got a fantastic panel. I think quite a few of you might know me from, as John mentioned, I'm one of the CTO craft coaches, also run the mentoring circles, so I've already seen some people I know. I'm looking forward to meeting lots of you over the next couple of days. So I will let the panel introduce themselves, partly because I don't want to get anything wrong, but also because I've noticed this habit that quite a few people have changed their jobs recently, so I'm just going to let them introduce themselves. Maria, would you?
Hi everyone, my name is Maria Gutierrez. I'm currently a VP of Engineering and Operations at PERSONIO, but formerly a VP of Strategy and Operations at Twitter.
Hi, my name is João Graça. I'm still the CTO and founder of UNBABEL. And previously I was a researcher on AI.
Hey, my name is Minoves. I was CTO at TYPEFORM until last July, where I took a sabbatical, and I'm now doing CTPO interim and advisory on early stage.
Hi, I'm Sophie Davies-Patrick. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at MPB. We buy and sell used photographic equipment.
Okay, thank you. So we're talking about let's get strategic, and we're going to talk about strategy. So to kick us off, we hear lots about strategy, right? There's business strategy, there's product strategy, there's technical strategy. I don't know, probably all sorts of others. What ones should we be interested as CTOs? Maybe João, could you kick us off on that?
So I think business strategy is where the company is trying to grow and how it's going to scale. Product is mostly what are you going to build. I think technology is about how are you going to build it. And I think as a CTO, the bare minimum is you need to support on how you're going to build and kind of support the product strategy. You need to be involved. And then depending on your type of CTO, you can be involved in different areas. So I personally, being a founder, I'm involved since business product, but I think you always have to be involved at least on the product strategy. The other thing is like, you basically are the best technical person in the room, so you're probably going to be providing what are the options that can shape the product strategy and not just basically say how to do it. Managing technical debt is super important as part of the technology strategy, but also look at the market. I can give an example that when we started in UNBABEL, there wasn't MLOps. MLOps was something that started, so we ended up building our own MLOps infrastructure. Nowadays, I'm kind of realizing, okay, maybe it's time to stop and just adopt one of the existing ones because that's not our core business and we can't keep up with running on GPUs, do all that stuff. And I think that's also part of the strategy.
Mm-hmm. Great. Maria, any thoughts?
I think that a cross-functional collaboration is key. Like first and foremost, as engineering leaders, we are, especially as CTO roles, VPs of engineering, you are first and foremost a business leader. So, and our goal is to ultimately add value. It's not just managing the technology and our teams, is adding value to the company or mitigating risks. I always see those as the two phases. So when it comes to getting involved with a strategy, as Joe was saying, it's like you need to first be able to understand what the business is trying to do, so your strategy is fully aligned with the goals of the business. You also want to try to influence that business strategy. When I was at Intercom, actually, we had a really good example of that. We started to explore with AI chatbots very earlier on. That wasn't part originally of the strategy for their business. We were more targeting small businesses and like more human support. And we saw that actually there was an opportunity to use technology to be able to tackle bigger customers and people that needed more automated support. And actually the investment that we did in that area and that was led through engineering ended up changing the strategy for the business, and we were able to then decide to move more up market and now actually be quite ahead. Intercom is quite ahead in some of the work around ChatGPT, etc., and how to utilize it. So there's a big role. You can't just say, hey, well, I'll take the orders of where we are going. You need to also proactively contribute to that. The other big key aspects of being involved is just to set expectations with people. If, to build a successful engineering organization, a big part of our strategy is not just the stack, it's our organizational strategy, how we do things. If we don't have a clear view of where we want to hire that talent, and that's not not reflected in the company way of thinking, hey, how are we, our people policies, how are we going to pay, etc., we might not be able to then hire the people that we need to deliver. So you just need to make sure that there's this opportunity to gather that input, but you are also setting expectations with the rest of the business, and that the decisions that you make as an engineering leader then helps you set expectations with the rest of the other functions on what you will be able or not to do, and the risks that their own strategies have based on the dependencies with you.
And I think that's really important, this idea of having aligned strategies. So you can have as many different ones as you like, right? You can have the clothing strategy or the, I don't know, beer strategy. But if they're not all aligned, then people are going to head off in different directions, and then you're going to have lots of trouble with, different groups doing different things, and then that's going to affect the whole organisation. Hopefully you're all on Slido, and I saw lots of questions earlier, so do please enter any, and I will try and keep an eye on there as well, so please do. Any other thoughts on different strategies?
Just to add to this, I think there is an often overlooked stakeholder of the technical strategy, which is internally in the engineering department.
Mm-hmm.
The product strategy provides engineers a why are we doing things. There was some questions about boring tech. I think that's necessary sometimes to tell people why are we doing this, and there's nothing boring if it's part of a broader mission, right? So I felt the pressure sometimes to have a strategy both internally from my teams that needed that explanation and that connection to business, as from the CEO. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really true, because especially as you scale, you haven't got the opportunity to be in every single meeting. So you need to give your engineers the context to make the decisions. I mean, they're the ones who should be making the decisions anyway, because they're closest to the customer and the technology. But when you are coaching them to make the pragmatic, right-sized decision between building the cathedral, building the shed, no, it needs to be right-sized, they need to understand the business context and the kind of time frames they're looking at. So it's really important to share that as much as you can.
So in terms of building a shared product and technology strategy then, so we've mentioned there that it's important to consider the different components and the different inputs. Who's got some good ideas on how to go about that and start that one off? Well, maybe I'll let you start, because I'm just sitting with what you said there, Sophie, about how engineers can get information from customers. So that needs somehow to get fed into the product strategy. So how might that work? Pao, would you like to start us off on that one?
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, it comes from the CEO asking you what's your technology strategy, and then you don't have one, especially if you are in a high growth environment. You just wake up one day from the tactical survivalist mindset to, oh, actually, I need a strategy now. So the first thing you do is you go to your CPO and you ask them, okay, what's your strategy, right? Because you definitely need that to build yours. Yours needs to be 100% aligned with the product strategy, which is aligned to the business strategy, and that's not always a given, right? The answers I usually get back are either a list of functional milestones, which are often too short term, meaning 6 to 12 months, and that's okay for the product roadmap, right? But a technological strategy needs much more long view, so you'll have to push for, but what in 2 years, what in 5 years, right? Even if it's high level, doubtful, let's talk about that. And then you just get a request for generally more throughput, or if the company has gone through some quality trauma, more quality, right? So I find there is a couple of powerful questions that help the CPO elicit exactly what they want. One of them is, what's your definition of quality? And really drill that down to concrete metrics, right? How do you want to put that in concrete? And the other one is using anti-values, which is not asking them what they value, but what they value over something else. You want quality over the speed. You want quality over innovation. It's the same quality. It's a different game, right? Make them choose trade-off, really puts them on the strategic mindset, and gives you very useful information for building your strategy.
Yeah, great. Just 1 second. I'd just like to ask the audience. So most of you are CTOs, right? So we might have do we have any CPOs, CPTOs in the audience? A few, right? So how many of you have a technical strategy? Okay. And how many of your companies have a product strategy? Okay. Right, so there's more companies have a product strategy than a tech strategy. So that's something for us to reflect on. Anyone want to?
Yeah,
Yep.
I think you can't really have a technical strategy without a product strategy, because what are you building? I think most of the times these two things go together, so you end up having both of them together. Just to address the previous point, so the way we work is with cross-functional teams. And so basically, we start by defining what are the business goals, and then I sit with the CPO and also with like our teams, and we discuss, okay, what are the main KPIs that we want to achieve, kind of overview of how we're going to get there, and then we handle the problems to the teams. And they come back. I think the biggest challenge is if you just digest too much to give to the teams, they won't be happy, and also you're losing their knowledge of the problem. If you give it too little, they're not aligned, so it's always a constant effort. But that's pretty much how we align between tech, and they go together, so the product and technology strategy go really close together. I think one of the difficulties is when you need to do something that is like pure technically, like change the architecture, pay some technical debt, you need to be very good at explaining why that is needed. Why is that going to take precedence over this thing that is going to drive a business outcome? And that's a challenge, but that's definitely something that we need to be able to articulate very well. Otherwise, it's never going to get done. And then we just get hammered like, why are we moving slow? Why is this happening? And that's on us because we didn't manage to articulate why do we need to do this now, and why is this going to empower the better outcomes in the future.
I think one common mistake that I see sometimes is mixing a vision for the organization versus the strategy. And I think we really need to remember that a strategy is a map, is how do you go from A to B, not trying just to describe what the end state is. So having that very clear description and diagnosis of the current situation that you are dealing with is probably the most important thing that you can do, because then based on that, you'll make some principles or strategic kind of approaches of like how you're going to solve those things within a very clear timeline. And I think that's the other key aspect of a strategy, is be very clear about how time bound it is. Sometimes you might just need an H2 strategy because you have to be super tactical. I think the last few years it's been a perfect example of that. It's like, I don't know if it's worth investing in building a 3-year strategy when everything is changing around us. And probably the most pragmatic thing to do is like, hey, 6 months, 12 months, this is where we're going to be, and then let's try to start getting more information about the long term. But from there, like having that very specific way of measuring, now that you have it time bound, you know what you're trying to achieve, what are you going to measure, and then what are those initiatives and specific steps, without getting to the detail of a roadmap, etc., that you are going to do, and what are the dependencies that you have. And once you start having those conversations, like you'll find that product leaders or other gaps in the organization might get clarified as well. Like you probably want to run it with your CFO. A big part of what we do, we are the biggest cost center normally in an organization. So how do you make sure that that is aligned with what the organization is trying to do financially? And the last thing I would say is like that importance to adapt, especially just now. You really need to be, it shouldn't be a document that you write once and you leave there. It's like you need to make sure that it has some teeth and actually the organization is delivering towards it, and we know whether we're doing the right things or not. But you need to be open to change things. Like I was at Twitter and over the last 2 years, and things changed tremendously during my time there, and we had to revisit multiple times our strategy because the world around us had completely changed, whether it was the macroeconomic situations or a pending acquisition, like high attrition when people weren't very sure what to do. So from going from a very growth-based strategy, we had to move very quickly to a very defensive strategy where the priority was reliability, keep the systems up, trust and security, and then anything additional, it was a bonus. But like sometimes in a very short period of time, you really need to take a very different approach to how you do things.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, that you have to update the strategy, right? And it shouldn't be every 5 minutes every week, but it should be regularly reassessed every quarter. I had some people come to me and, yeah, we've got the strategy, technical strategy. I was like, okay, can I see it? Yeah, and it's like dated 18 months ago, and it's like, is it relevant? Well, no, not really, but at least we have one. So it suggests that that's not really a proper strategy, but it does need to be. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I think shared goals is really important as well. My previous employer was a large enterprise organisation, and my product partner was incentivized strongly to the extent that he had a family bathroom he wanted to build, and he was really incentivized to do different things to me, who wanted to go on a holiday, and there was no way, however well we partnered together, we were both going to be able to, hit those numbers, and that was really problematic. Where I am now, smaller organisation, the whole exec has the same goals. So we're all just working together, and I think whether the monetization or just the hitting of the goals is what's personally important to you. I think having a kind of clear target across the exec is so key, having felt it on both sides.
Yeah, and I think what I'm hearing a little bit there is that in a smaller organisation, maybe you don't have to have a kind of more formal strategy because it comes through in the way you work more closely together. Is that fair?
Well, when I arrived as a first CTO, there was no strategy. There was no product strategy or tech strategy. And, since then we've grown, definitely a hyper-growth company, kind of, I think, 3x, 4x within the product and engineering organisation. Started with me doing both roles, and we've now promoted my head of product to CPO, which is great. We partner really closely. No, I mean, the fact there was no strategy was not a good place to be.
Right.
So I took an approach when I started to really understand, what we needed to do to write our first strategy. The CEO, founder, had kind of been the acting CTO as well. So all the sort of themes we heard about in the previous talk were coming through. I actually started with talking to the team because I thought, well, I understand what the business wants to do, but unless I can get the team behind me, we're not going to be going in the right direction. So, I could clearly see where the issues were, but I wanted them to tell me, and really they told me sort of 80% of what I could observe and some things I hadn't observed as well. And I drew a kind of word cloud and presented it back to them, and, they felt heard, and using their words, using their pain points, I wrote our first strategy. And because I felt I had the team behind me when I first presented it to the exec and then the board, it was really well received, and I kind of had that confidence as well. And I think having done that was a really good thing to do, because as we scaled and we brought on a lot of people, we were very clear where we were going, and had the conversations. We were scaling during the boom, and it was tough to kind of make our case. But I think the fact that we'd focused on the culture as well and happiness of the team, and then that we were kind of clear what we were doing from technology, everything from including a tech radar, so people could see that we were innovating as well as also being kind of right-sized in terms of our tech stack as well, through to investing huge amount in CI/CD and automated testing, so we could actually improve our time to market kind of sort of tenfold, which really gave the board confidence as well. So I'm really glad I undertook that exercise, and there's a lot of pressure when you first start to kind of start delivering, but actually to slow down and understand what the team needs and the business needs, and really get buy-in from that, as I constantly thanking my past self, even today, kind of three or 4 years later.
Yeah, so that's really great that you didn't feel you had to do the strategy on your own, in a sense, right? You really got lots of input in it, and that's something I think is really important. A lot of people come to me in coaching and say, well, I need to write a strategy. And it's, well, do you need to write it, or do you need to get help to write it? Because, and certainly as a new person in the organisation, then there's lots to learn. But if you've been a CTO in the organisation for a long time, then you'll have quite a narrow vision, most likely, and you need really to get input from other people. Howard, did you want to add something?
Yeah, a reflection regarding what you're saying on variability, right? Having a 18-month span that we know it's not going to happen. I think as a professional, we have a tendency to be tactical. We literally keep the lights on, right? Which pushes a lot to be tactical. The motto that always helps me get into a more strategic mindset is that being tactical is having one way to success. Being strategical is making sure all the ways lead to success, right? So when you talk with your CPO and your stakeholders and try to build a strategy with them, it's very easy to fall down to a chain of milestones or a roadmap of the things that need to happen. And that's fine. You need one way to success. You need your preferred way to success, right? But it really gets strategical when you start asking about what are we not sure about, what may happen, How are we going to be robust to that, right? And then you're forced to think much more in terms of principles, in being ready, on incorporating the learnings as they happen, right? And not getting the organization attached to that milestone 3 launching the new platform thing, right? Which if then doesn't happen, you may still be on your path to success with the new learnings, but then it feels like failure, right? So I think it's very important to talk about what are we sure about, what is the leeway in all these needs, and prepare for the span of it, not just for one way to success.
Yeah, great point. So I see we've got some questions here that have got quite a lot of traction, so make sure that I'll read them out because I'm not sure you can. So how do you each determine if your technical strategy is working, and what are your metrics for success? Anyone?
Happy to take it. I think as part of the strategy, you need to put some clear metrics of how you are going to be able to evaluate whether it is successful or not. The 3 areas that I tend to look at, one is like the foundations, is like what is our architecture goals and technologies and how we're going to use those ones. Then some around how we build, how we get things done as a product and engineering organization, and some metrics around understanding our ability actually to deliver and the quality. And the last one are around your organizational design. Is like what type of team are you going to build that is going to be able to deliver on those other parts, like how we build and the actual foundational kind of infrastructure, architecture. And if you have very clear goals for those things, and the last one will be hiring goals or performance goals for the team. In the middle one will be your DORA metrics, maybe to try to figure out what are your, how you are delivering and what's getting on the way of that flow. And the other one's very specific technical metrics around reliability or security or all the different things that you probably care about, making sure that are in good health. What you were saying before, what is the bar to health and quality that you're trying to aim for? But you need to be explicit about those ones in your strategy so that you can check progress towards it.
And do you have the time scales in the strategy as well for how soon you expect to see some changes?
I think I like to break down, it depends on the cycles, like the rhythms of the organization. Like if I have a year strategy, I will definitely have quarterly milestones just to force that reflection and to see if you are on track towards what you're trying to achieve. But it's good to break it down and make sure that you have some early signs whether things are going to plan or not, or if you need to make any changes.
Anyone else got thoughts on that one? João?
I mean, just to add up, I normally think about, I have 2 answers that I need to know, which is, are we building the right product? And that has a lot to do with the product strategy. I think in some way it's easier to measure because you define the KPIs for success. So cost per word of translation at UNBABEL, speed of delivery, and I just track them. And the other one is, are we building the product right? And that is kind of like the harder one. And I mean, everyone in engineering knows it's hard to measure engineering productivity. I mean, it's kind of like, if we're having too many production problems when you deliver, that's a bad sign the strategy is not working. And if everybody's complaining that we're going too slow, the strategy is not working. There are always going to be complaints that we're going too slow. It's a question of measuring. And then you need to analyze, okay, why do I believe we're going to, first of all, do I believe we're going too slow? And if that's the case, why? Is it because we have a lot of technical debt? We're not going too slow at all? Is it because people? Is it because of the team structure? Like team typologies, like we mentioned, is very important. And I think those are kind of like then what feed the strategy of what you want to change.
Did you?
Yeah, I've got a few to add. Definitely a shout out for DORA metrics as well. I'm really keen on those. The other things we're currently measuring are core web vitals, which Google have sort of spearheaded. And yes, you can make a site more performant and fast by throwing money at it. But if you have a fixed budget for your kind of hosting costs, then that constrains you. So you have to engineer well. So that's on the kind of technology side. So I guess thinking people, process, technology. So process, we look at cycle time, kind of classic agile metric that just shows you how work is flowing through through the system. Like many of us, we're kind of running as lean as we can, so we have to really ensure that flow is there. And I think that that's something that helps. It's a lot of companies are kind of addicted to WIP or work in progress, and we're no different even as a small company, and continually making the case internally that, you know, you need to just do less quicker is much more efficient than kind of moving everything else on a snail's pace across 10 initiatives and so on, and having kind of metrics to prove that really helps. And then I guess the last of those three being people, I've struggled to know how to measure happiness actually. There are some proxies for it like retention, but the market can kind of confuse that a bit. We're about to trial a weekly pulse, which is just a simple question saying how, you know, if you had a good week. I think we're big enough now, the team, that the data should be statistically significant. But, you know, I don't know how it's going to go. We're starting it soon. We were actually did it as an R&D project on some new tech, so it kind of is interesting for that as well. Yeah. Any other ideas on how to measure team happiness?
I think I've done is mostly engagement surveys. We use an intercom, a framework that we put together around, you know, high performance of the team, and there was a series of different categories that we were looking around: their ability to focus, to make decisions quickly, did they have the right capacity, how did they collaborate with other people, the level of impact that they were having, and teams were reflecting on all of those things themselves. So there was a little bit part of the retrospectives to come up with actually how are we feeling. You used to get a lot of data just from those conversations, a little bit more structured conversations that we were able to then feed into, okay, where do we have some potential issues, or what areas do we need to invest on? What are the playbooks that different teams that are struggling with similar things can get together to figure out how to overcome? So having some of those kind of frameworks in place and common ways of forcing the conversation can be actually quite helpful.
Yeah, we did Spotify health checks, which are great, and that kind of tells you by team, but it tends to be quite per team. So I'm trying to look across the whole org. But yeah, I like the idea of kind of similar framework.
Engagement with those things.
Yeah.
So but I can, like, the one thing I would really highlight is, and I see that a lot, like, we really need to have metrics to measure how we're doing. We can't just get away with having a black box in engineering just because we assume that other, you know, your peers in the C-suite don't understand what's going on. That's not your permission to not have an accountability on what you're trying to deliver. And I think a lot of the things that fail in engineering organizations and things that don't get done is because there isn't that accountability and clear commitment. So if one thing I would encourage you all is, like, put yourself out there, because you would not put up with a sales team that doesn't have very clear metrics to deliver for the business, so we shouldn't do that either.
Yeah. And before, I don't want to go sidetrack too much about measuring contentment, but I think there has certainly been a move towards this much more frequent light touch rather than doing this big engagement exercise, which, but just by its nature, will skew any findings. We've got a couple of great questions here. I think we can take them together. They're about what does a technical strategy actually look like. So there's a question, is it a set of documents or is it a presentation? What kind of things does it include? Are there any public examples? Anyone got any kind of thoughts on how you create yours and what it looks like?
Just a thought. I don't think you'll find a template out there. I think it's very particular to what your org needs. A litmus test I apply to a strategy is it needs to be short enough that you can send it to all the C-levels and they'll understand it without further explanation, and they'll read it. Of course, that's why it needs to be short. So, like, a 2-pager is a good compromise, but most importantly, it's what you talk about, and you are translating to a marketing function, to a CFO function, to all these functions, and they need to get it, right? Which mentions a very common anti-pattern on strategy, where people leave part of the work out of the strategy, and they just talk about the things that business wants to hear, or they think business wants to hear, and then they have this technical depth roadmap or hackathons that has a lot of the work and a lot of business value, but in the strategy is just mentioned as a tax. Right? Just let us do our thing one Friday a month, right? Or one hackathon every quarter. I think 100% of your activities need to be covered on the product strategy, on the technical strategy, sorry. And if you have trouble to put them there, you don't know how to explain them. and that's a problem. You should know how to explain everything that's going on. Everything is linked to a business outcome, right? So as long as you can write a 2-pager and you cover this and you can send it to a CMO, CFO, and they more or less get it, right? It's going to be clarifying questions, it's going to be a conversation starter, that's fine, but they more or less get it. I think you are on the right ballpark for a strategy.
Mm-hmm. Yep, great. Any other?
For me, it's a 2-pager, like brief statement of your current situation. What are your principles and things you are optimizing for? How are you approaching that? Key metrics, and then the few key initiatives that you are going to be driving to achieve those things. And like clarity and being memorable is probably the most important thing that you can do.
And similarly, a kind of business level, or more into the details?
I think at the I think then each initiative should have a breakdown. I think you want to summarize the essence and what you're trying to achieve, and then you can have a more detailed kind of strategy for that specific initiative. Actually, the last thing I like to add as well are risks and key dependencies that those initiatives have as well, just to be very clear of what other parts of the business might need to be aware, or things that, assumptions that we're making.
So I don't think I've solved this at all. So this is an ongoing learning process. What we're trying right now is, so we have a roadmap with all the different initiatives on the product, and we kind of added 2 swim lanes, one for technical debt, where we add things there and explain why, and also for security debt. And pretty much because we don't want to be just a text, like the stakeholders that look at the roadmap need to know where we're spending time trying to add it. The other thing, which is more internal, that is on my wish list, I never managed to get it correctly, is have good architectural documentation where you can actually see where you are and what are the red areas, so you can actually prioritize what you need to tackle, and everybody has visibility on that. I think those 2 are kind of a must that you need to have.
And are you similarly 1 or 2-page document, or do you have something different?
We have normally a presentation, a small document explaining the roadmap, but then the swim lanes, they all explain what they are going to get there, and that's how we do it.
Yeah. And I think I've seen presentations, documents, but I think once they get beyond 4 or 5 slides or 2 pages, then the question is it distilled enough? So, did you?
Yeah, I mean, we use presentations because I like to put diagrams. I think that's kind of a good way for people to engage with it. And the other thing we did when we were writing our first one, as I said, was we really started with the why, because this was new for the organisation, like almost like why bother? Why do we need a tech strategy? And as I mentioned earlier, I could show the kind of word cloud of what the team had been telling me we needed to improve, and we could also show the business goals. And I think that told a really good story about, why we're needing this. And of course, we then go on to what we are actually going to do and how we measure it as well. But yeah, definitely agree. It needs to be a mixed audience. It needs to be, it's difficult because you need your CFO to understand it and your junior QA, so it needs to be kind of really covering all levels, I think. And the other thing that I think we all need to remember, because the role's busy, life's busy, right? So, you write it and it's great, and you do a roadshow with it and everyone's happy and you're feeling good, and then the world moves on, and 6 months later you realise you haven't looked at it. And I think simple tactical things like just putting a checkpoint in your senior team's diary every quarter, let's just look at the strategy, what do we need to change, are we on track, and so on, kind of keeps you honest. And you usually are, but it kind of helps you focus, I think.
So I wanted to bring us, we've got more questions, but I wanted to bring us back to the title, which was being less reactive. So how can having a technical strategy help us as CTOs be less reactive? Maria, would you like to?
I think there's 2 key components. One, it provides clarity for the organization, and we all know what happens when engineers don't have clarity about what they need to do or how they have to go about it. You end up having, a lot of different people approaching problems in a different way. You end up with a mixed match architecture or a tech stack that you can't control. At the beginning might be okay, but actually if your business starts to be a little bit successful, those things are going to have an impact on your ability to support the customers and how you are going to provide the basic quality of the service even staying up. Everybody, you can't build tools to improve your monitoring, or how do you deploy if everything is a mismatch of situations? You lose a lot of effort as well. Like a lot of people doing things, you end up having to consolidate and throw away a lot of things. So that creates that clarity. And then the other aspect is the alignment. And if you don't have a plan, whoever has a plan is going to dictate what you do. So if your sales team has a plan, if your product team has a plan, they will have very concrete things, and they will have thought about what they need to achieve and got the buy-in that that's the thing to do. If you don't have a plan to match it or to counter and identify those problems, you are going to have to be always responding to the priorities that they bring to the table. So I think you really need to do that so that you can manage those expectations with other teams and really take control of the work the organization is doing versus just being a reaction factory to whatever fire is coming up from the organization. So just have those things in mind. It's like clarity to your team so you don't waste effort, and alignment on the work that you want to do so you can be in charge of the destiny of the work that you're doing and ultimately the results that you deliver.
Paul?
I would challenge the question on, I think being reactive is not necessarily bad, right? It's all about how do you react and when is the reaction, what is the incident you are reacting to coming from, right? If any strategy that's worth is going to want to incorporate learnings, changes on the landscape that happen along the path. You need to start thinking that that's going to happen. How are you going to react to that, right? The problem is when reactions come from lack of planning or outages or another C-level changing their mind, not sticking to what we agreed, right? So you got to go to the source problem of the reaction, or also set the expectations internally that there are certain things that we absolutely want to react to, right? Like discovery on the product side or certain new technologies that may appear on the tech radar, and that's fine. And about not getting too attached to that particular plan, that particular milestone, right? Replanning is actually good. If you're in a constant loop of replanning, you're in a bad situation, right? But if you are sticking too much to a single plan, that's also not another way of not having a strategy. Right?
But I guess you wouldn't know that you weren't sticking to a strategy without having one, right? Or the plan that is encased within the strategy. So I guess if you don't have a strategy, you'd be kind of uncontrolled reactiveness, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, this is a real kind of growing pain question. So, I started at a very small company, and now we're medium-sized. We're getting there anyway. And the founder and CEO is reluctant to have a written strategy, a business strategy, because he feels it will make him less agile and less able to slightly change. It's interesting, I've just been watching one topic, how his thoughts revolve and what he says kind of each month at the exec meeting. And I can sort of see the point, but that only goes so far. When you're scaling fast and you're bringing a lot of people in, you need to commit to something in writing because it's just not scalable unless you've got the sort of CEO who's always out on the road doing all hands, which this individual isn't. And also they should be talking to investors anyway if we're scaling. It's just not really feasible. So at some point you need to. So it's almost putting it at the right level. So I think it's about your principles, and that allows you then to make reactive decisions. So for example, one of our principles is that we will always use Terraform for our infrastructure as code so that we don't have snowflakes. And like that was, that's set in stone. We've decided that. And, having that there means that even when we're on production support calls, that is something baked into the way we work, is just a small example. And I think having those kind of guiding lights in your strategy means that you can also be reactive as circumstances change.
Yeah. But also, if the CEO changes the business strategy overnight, because the product and tech teams are building something that, the cycle times are usually months or maybe years to build some of these platforms, then that's a reason for kind of shackling the CEO to a business strategy, right? Because otherwise you're going to get out of line.
So two things. I think in terms of being reactive, there's two main causes. One is like the system is burning, and that's where strategy helps because you kind of know the technical depth, the architectural problems. You should be able to foresee a little bit what can go wrong, except for a bug that you can just roll back. The other one is because you have a huge pressure, normally from sales, to add another feature to do a deal. I can remember one like multi-region deployment. That's a constant one that comes. And it's huge until we explain what's the effort, what it takes to do, and what we're not going to do to be able to do that. And then it starts being urgent. And that's a cycle. And I think the second part of the sales is mostly like, if you're able to communicate, and that's part of the strategy, these big infrastructure changes for some reason, what they entail, what's the effort, and what's to gain, then the pressure diminishes because they can start doing their own judgment about, okay, I need this new integration or I need this multi-region deployment. This takes X and this takes Y. They kind of iterate. The other thing that we haven't mentioned here, but I just want to take because of your last comment and to give some support to the CEOs as well or to the founders, is it's very hard to have a strategy when you don't have product market fit. And that happens on most startups as you're growing. So, it's very, like, we all want to have a strategy because people like to know exactly where they're going and what they have to do tomorrow. But the fact is, if you raise money and you have to grow X until the end of the money, and you're not growing, you're going to start throwing everything to the wall to see what sticks and finding product market strategy. And that's just part of life. And then the strategy is much more nimble, right? It's kind of back to principles, like you said.
One of the reasons, so my background, I've been a software engineer for over 23 years, and the last 10 years I've been more in traditional VP of engineering roles. But over the last 5 years or so, I've really been focusing very much on operations as well. And the reason that I've been working at scale-up, so companies that are going through a lot of growth, and you have to really react to the needs. And what I've learned is you need to separate a little bit how you work, what is the operating system that you're trying to build as an organization. And whilst you want that to evolve, you want it to be pretty consistent. You want to give people the frameworks and that clarity on how they work. Because then if the actual thing that you're trying to build, what the business is trying to achieve and deliver, you change from having to work in these roadmap items for product to these other ones because we've seen an opportunity and we want to change. That doesn't impact. The way you work should not dramatically change. That's the stability part. You might be able to then adapt to the new goals and the things that you're trying to do, but what you don't want to be is changing everything at once. You don't want to change the things you're working on, but also how you work. So if you can find the appropriate level of stability depending on the stage of your company, give that clarity to the organization, it's a lot easier to react to any changes that are coming from what you are trying to actually build.
Thanks, Maria. So we've just got 2 or 3 minutes left. So quick show of hands, who's going to leave now and go and write their strategy with their team? Yeah, excellent. We've got a few. Now, who's now incentivized and feels better able to go and create a technical strategy? Yeah? Oh, look, great. So quite a few people there that have energy to go away and do this. Just in the last couple of minutes, what should they do? What are the key top tips from each of you?
I think for me is analyze what do you think are the gaps that are holding your organization back, and try to very briefly document that if you don't have it, and what do you think is the path forward. Just start very small, and as they were saying, talk to people in your organization, because it should not take a lot of effort. You can decide how long you spend on that. My recommendation is that you don't make this a multi-month process. It's just get a little bit tactical, and then you'll refine and start building up from there. But you can start with something very quick. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Maria.
Get a date in the diary where you need to present it to the board, because then you'll definitely do it.
Yeah. Great.
I would say less is more. Strategy is not big. It's small. It's condensed, and also think of it in terms of narrative, because at the end of the day, strategy is useful if people understands it. And it starts at the why and it gets you somewhere. So I do I write a pager, but before that I see myself explaining my strategy to a lot of different people and feeling if it feels good or not, right? And if it feels good, then probably you're on the right abstraction layer and using the right words, right? Before getting to Jira and planning and road mapping and all the things.
Yeah, thanks, Pal.
I mean, I think on top of all that has been said, just try to think about what look good's like. So a lot of times you have to make architectural decisions that are not ideal because of time constraints. I feel it always helps if you have some place where you document, this is the ideal place. I might not be able to build it right now, but this is where I would like to go. Because then when you have to take shortcuts, at least you can align the shortcuts to the endpoint that you're going to get. And it helps communicating that to the rest of the company. I think that's something very interesting to do.
Yeah, all great points. And I think I would just reinforce the one that we've said several times. Don't feel you have to do it yourself. Make sure you involve other people. Maybe even entrust someone else to go away and draft it and then craft it with them. So. All right, well, thank you very much to the wonderful panelists. I hope you've all enjoyed the discussion, and we'll be around. I think all of us around for, yep. So if you've got further questions, then please feel free to come and speak to us. And I think